I'm just going to read a report about Lula winning in Telesur, and then I'll compare it to how The Guardian reported it. Then I want to talk about Lula as a politician, Lula, what he's done, what the significance of all of this is. I think that's really important here. So let me pull this up because we want to get right to this. We want to cover these stories, and I'm looking out for the possibility of the special guest coming on to talk about all this stuff, where we will definitely pivot if that should occur. So Lula is the new president of Brazil. So this was reported just a few hours ago. And it says Brazil's former president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, narrowly defeated incumbent Jair Bolsonaro in Sunday's runoff and was elected head of state for the third time, confirmed the Superior Electoral Court. Election mathematically defined, the agency indicated on its website, noting that with 98.1% of the centers counted, or the votes, Lula is left with 50.83% of the votes against 49.17% for Bolsonaro. So Lula essentially won by just under 2%. More than 156 million Brazilians were summoned to choose this Sunday their next president between Bolsonaro and Lula, the most voted candidates in the first round on October 2nd. 12 states of the country elected their governor in the second round, and voting also took place in 181 centers installed abroad, which Lula, I think, got something ridiculous. I think he won like 90+% of those votes abroad, which is, to me, surprising. I've only, I grew up in the Boston area, in an area where there actually were quite a few Brazilian migrants. And let's just say they would never support Lula. I remember I worked with folks, and this is just how you know that there are real class contradictions in Brazil. I worked with multiple people from Brazil who lived in the United States, who lived in the city I was working in, and in the agency I was working in, and they celebrated when Lula went to jail. They were, I remember when the sham trials were happening on Lula's corruption case, they were begging for him to get killed. I mean, this is how vitriolic the oligarchy can be. And I believe that they were, they were of kind of like a landed class in Brazil. Wealthy. They traveled back and forth. So anyway, all the main polls in Brazil for this Sunday's runoff showed the former president and leader in the Workers' Party, the PT Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, as a favorite of the president, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, this is the sixth time that leftist candidate Lula ran for president, while the far-right leader Bolsonaro sought re-election for the Liberal Party. The candidate elected today for a third term exercised his right to vote in São Bernardino de Campo, the cradle of the trade union movement in São Paulo. His hope was to make Sunday, October 30th, a historic day in Brazil, and it seems like he did. Last October 2nd, Lula won the first round, so I told you, but it was closer than expected. He didn't get the 50% needed to win in the first round. He got 48.43% and beat Bolsonaro in the first round by about 5%. So that's the report. Here's what The Guardian had to say, though. This is how you can tell there's a bias, right? And there's a lot of people saying, oh, the mainstream Western press, they love Lula. They love Lula. And I just want to say this about that. The mainstream Western corporate media does not love Lula. What they love is stability. And I do believe that there are some who think that Bolsonaro is too rogue, too vitriolic, and too much of an eyesore, kind of like Trump, but even worse in the sense that unlike Trump, who will kind of who was underestimated. I don't think anyone in the U.S. and Western political establishment underestimates someone like Bolsonaro, given his relationship to the dictatorship. They know this guy's serious and has a political background. So I do believe that there were some in the establishment who said, "Okay, we'll stomach Lula and we'll try to crush him from the inside and concede this." But I don't think that there was outright corporate media support and support from the political establishment. I don't believe that. I didn't see anything like that. And I just, to me, it's just, I think, a way of diverting the true importance, diverting people away from the true importance of what this all means. So Lula stages a comeback to beat far-right Bolsonaro in Brazil. Oh, okay, they changed. Okay, the headline online put stunning comeback. Now they say astonishing comeback. So they changed it because initially it was stunning. And when I saw that word stunning, I was like, stunning comeback? What do you even mean? He was favored. But here's what they had to say. Brazil's former leftist president, Lula da Silva, has sealed an astonishing political comeback, beating far-right incumbent Jair Bolsonaro in one of the country's most significant and bruising elections in the country's history. So 99% of the votes were counted. He won 50.8% of the votes over Bolsonaro's 49.1%. A few streets away on Paulista Avenue, one of the city's main arteries, ecstatic Lula supporters gathered to celebrate his victory in the downfall of a radical right-wing president whose presidency produced an environmental tragedy and saw 700,000 Brazilians die of COVID. Our dream is coming true. We need to be freed. Joe Calif, a 62-year-old social activist who was among the elated throng. Brazil was in a very dangerous place, and now we are getting back to our freedom. The last 4 years have been horrible. Gabriele Soares, a 19-year-old student, jumped for joy as she commemorated the eminent victory of a leader whose social policies helped her achieve a university education. I feel so happy. During 4 years of Bolsonaro, I saw my family slip backwards, and under Lula, they flourished, she said, a rainbow banner draped over her shoulders. Ecstatic and tearful supporters of Lula, who secured more than 59 million votes over Bolsonaro's 57 million, hugged and threw cans of beers in the air. This means we are going to have someone in power who cares about those at the bottom. Right now, we have a person who doesn't care about the majority of us, about LGBT people. Bolsonaro is a bad person. He doesn't show a drop of empathy or solidarity for others. There is no way he can continue to be president. There was celebration around the region, too, as leftist allies tweeted their congratulations. Viva Lula, said Colombia's leader, Gustavo Petro. Argentina's president, Alberto Fernandez, celebrated a new era in Latin American history, an era of hope and of a future that starts right now. Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, Mexico's president, commemorated what he called a victory for equality and humanism. Outside of Bolsonaro's home, west in Rio, there was dejection and anger as the news sunk in. I'm angry, said Monique Almeida, a 36-year-old beautician. I don't know what to say. While Raiz, a 50-year-old electrician, said he was convinced the vote had been rigged. It's fraud without a doubt. They manipulated the count. The armed forces must intervene, he demanded. And if they didn't, the population must take to the streets to demand military intervention so we don't hand power over to the communists. So what's so striking about this article is that sounds pretty good, right? Sounds pretty good. The Guardian talks about all the workers and the ordinary people, the student, the worker, right? They love Lula because Lula improved their lives, and they didn't like bad Bolsonaro, and they even did the like he's for LGBTQ people, which is definitely a way to kind of trigger people's anger. So corporate media is all about trying to trigger people's anger, and so they think that if you put an LGBT in there, then that will, of course, trigger. Bad news is good media, like good. It gets clicks, it gets likes. They also, which shouldn't be the case, but that's the kind of culture war environment we live in, and I think it's ridiculous. But they also ended, right? So you had astonishing victory at the top. Astonishing? It was pretty much expected to be a tight race and one that Lula was slightly favored in. The worry for me was not that this would be an astonishing victory, but that there was suppression and foul play, and that there would be such a fear-mongering tactics from the oligarchy, the political establishment, the police, that would affect the outcome. That didn't happen, and that's great, or at least it didn't affect the outcome. However, astonishing is not the right word, but at the end, you see what they ended with? They ended with what they hope, and I know this is what they're thinking, is that, now, and the same thing has happened in other cases, right? Bolivia, for example, because, Luis Arce, when he won, when he won in 2020, what was that, the end of 2020, I believe it was, when he was reelected, when he was elected out of the coup regime that lasted for about a year, the Western political establishment didn't make too much of a fuss about it. right? They weren't like, "Oh my god, we can't recognize them." But you know that there's machinations happening behind the scenes. And I think even you can just sense it in the way this article is structured that, yeah, we're not going to say anything bad. And obviously, there's good parts about Lula being elected now. But watch out. There are people who are hating the communists. They call Lula a communist, which is hilarious. And they're going to rebel. That was the end of the article. So, not really what you would say is it's all about the craft. It's all about how things are constructed. It's not only about, is this bias or is it not bias? Is this providing a fair picture? How are these articles structured? Why would the conclusion be that, right? Be the opposition and kind of give the last word to these anti-communist far right forces that are probably going to mobilize against this in whatever way they can. I don't know how successful it will be. But I wanted to just show you some of that coverage because that's how it's going to be, I think, in the beginning. And we will see how the US and the Western political establishment, the imperialist establishment, respond to Lula's victory as things move along and as policy begins to take shape. Of course, that's not going to happen until the winter time because he doesn't take office until the winter time.